My sister took me to court to steal $5.2 million from me. She stood in front of the judge, squeezed out a few fake tears, and said, "My sister is sick. She has been mentally ill for years and cannot take care of herself." My mother sat in the front row crying and nodding along in agreement. Then the old judge adjusted his glasses, looked down at my sister, and asked a question that made the entire courtroom go dead silent. He asked, "Do you actually know who she really is?" Their faces turned completely pale, and that was the exact moment their living hell officially began. Before I reveal how they dug their own graves, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget. It all started on a typical Sunday evening after church. The smell of fried chicken and collard greens usually brought a sense of comfort, but in my mother, Beatrice's house, family dinners were just another excuse for a firing squad. I was sitting quietly at the edge of the dining table, taking a sip of my warm tea, minding my own business. Suddenly, a crumpled piece of paper hit my plate, narrowly missing my drink. I looked up to see my white brother-in-law, Trent, standing there with a smug look on his face. Trent was an investment director at a major financial firm, a title he made sure to weave into absolutely every conversation we ever had. He pointed a manicured finger at the paper on my plate. "That is the mechanic's bill for the family SUV," Trent announced loudly so the whole room could hear. $1,500. Since you are 32 years old and still living rent-free under your mother's roof, the least you can do is contribute. Or are you too busy playing video games on your computer all day to pull your weight? He laughed, and my sister Jasmine immediately joined in. Jasmine was the golden child, a luxury real estate agent who was completely obsessed with appearances and status. To them, my plainclothes, quiet nature, and remote work meant I was a total loser. They had no idea that when I was sitting in my room staring at a screen, I was actually writing code and managing global security systems as the CEO of a highly successful cybersecurity firm. I kept my identity completely anonymous for my own peace of mind, letting them believe whatever they wanted to believe. Before I could even respond to Trent, my mother slammed her fork down. "Trent is absolutely right, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "Look at your sister. Jasmine has a real career, a successful husband, and a beautiful home. And look at you. You are 32 years old and still a massive burden to this family." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, but I kept my face perfectly blank. I was used to this routine. Sunday dinners were always the designated time for Beatrice to elevate Jasmine by stepping on my neck. But my mother was not done. She leaned forward across the table, making sure to hit where she knew it hurt the most. "We all know you are not entirely stable, Maya. We had to deal with your little mental breakdown 5 years ago when you thought you could actually start a business. You failed miserably, and we had to pick up the pieces. You are just lucky we let you stay here given your condition." Her words were meant to cut deep. 5 years ago, I had experienced severe burnout and depression after my very first tech startup failed. It was the darkest period of my life, a time when I needed my family the most. Instead of supporting me, they used my vulnerability as a weapon, permanently branding me as the crazy, unstable daughter. They loved holding that over my head to make themselves feel superior. What they refused to acknowledge was that I had pulled myself out of that darkness entirely on my own, eventually building a multi-million-dollar tech empire right under their noses while they thought I was just playing games on my laptop. Trent crossed his arms over his expensive tailored shirt, soaking in my mother's validation. So he sneered, looking down his nose at me. "Are you going to pay the bill? Or do I need to call the mechanic and tell them my sister-in-law is too broke to afford a brake pad replacement?" Jasmine let out a sharp, condescending laugh, sipping her expensive red wine. "Give her a break, Trent. You know she cannot afford that. I will just pay it. We cannot expect someone in her mental state to handle adult responsibilities." The entire dining room fell silent, waiting for my usual reaction. In the past, I might have cried or tried to defend myself. I might have tried to explain that I was working hard, that my work was real and demanding. But I was no longer the fragile, insecure girl they had broken 5 years ago. I did not need their approval, and I certainly did not need their charity. I did not say a single word. I did not raise my voice or try to justify my existence to people who were determined to misunderstand me. Instead, I calmly picked up my smartphone from the table. I opened my private banking app, navigated to the transfer section, and typed in Trent's phone number. I transferred exactly $1,500 directly into his account. The transaction took less than 5 seconds. A loud ping echoed from Trent's pocket. He pulled out his phone, his confident smirk faltering instantly as he read the notification on his screen. His eyes widened slightly, darting from the phone screen to my face. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The sudden transfer of that much cash without a single second of hesitation clearly threw him off balance. For a man who prided himself on being the wealthy financial savior of the family, seeing the sister-in-law he thought was a penniless charity case casually drop $1,500. Like it was pocket change was a complete shock to his system. I picked up my teacup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and looked directly into Trent's confused eyes. "Consider it paid," I said smoothly, my voice completely steady. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have some games to get back to." I stood up from the table, my posture perfectly straight, leaving the crumpled bill sitting right next to my half-eaten dinner. I walked out of the dining room without looking back, feeling the heavy, confused silence I left in my wake. It was a small victory, but I knew it was only the beginning of a much larger war. I retreated to the temporary safety of the guest bedroom upstairs, but the illusion of peace lasted less than an hour. Downstairs, the heavy silence did not mean they were reflecting on their behavior or feeling ashamed of their cruelty. It simply meant they were regrouping, licking their wounds after being blindsided by my sudden payment. In a family driven entirely by superficial status and financial domination, a sudden display of financial independence from the designated scapegoat was a direct threat to their authority. I sat at the small desk, my laptop open, monitoring the automated security logs for MTech. The system was running flawlessly, completely insulated from the drama of my personal life. But before I could sink back into my work, the heavy wooden door to my room was thrown open so hard it banged against the wall. Jasmine stood in the doorway, her breathing shallow, and her face flushed with a toxic mixture of shock and sheer rage. In her hand, she was clutching a thick, official-looking manila envelope that I recognized instantly. It was my private mail from the county probate and zoning office, something that had arrived earlier that week and had been sitting in the mail basket on the kitchen counter downstairs. Jasmine had no boundaries. She had never respected my privacy as a child, and clearly she had no intention of doing so now. She had torn the envelope open, violating federal mail laws without a single shred of hesitation, because her insatiable curiosity always outweighed her morality. "You manipulative, sneaky little liar," Jasmine hissed, stepping into the room and slamming the door shut behind her. Her voice was a harsh whisper, trembling with an intensity that showed just how deeply shook she was. "What is the meaning of this?" She marched over to the desk and slammed the documents down right next to my laptop. I did not flinch. I did not look at the papers because I already knew exactly what they contained. It was a formal valuation and rezoning notice for a piece of barren, forgotten land on the far eastern edge of the city. 10 years ago, right before our father passed away, he had secretly signed that deed over to me. He knew how my mother and Jasmine operated. He knew that if he left everything to Beatrice, Jasmine would end up with every single cent, and I would be left out in the cold. So he gave me that land. At the time, it was just an overgrown, barren plot of dirt that nobody wanted. My mother and sister had mocked it when they found out back then, calling it a worthless wasteland and laughing at our father for leaving his youngest daughter a pile of rocks while Jasmine received his primary investment portfolio. For a decade, I had quietly paid the minimal property taxes on that dirt, never mentioning it, never bringing it up at family dinners. But the world changes fast. The city had quietly approved a massive tech corridor initiative, and my father's barren plot of land happened to be sitting dead center in the newly designated zone for the state's multi-billion-dollar high-tech data center project. The document Jasmine had illegally opened was the official county appraisal. The land had just been formally revalued at exactly $5.2 million. Jasmine's eyes were practically bloodshot with jealousy. She stared at me as if I had personally stolen that money out of her own bank account. $5.2 million, she ranted, her fingers trembling as she tapped the paper. This automotive waste of space Dad gave you is worth more than my entire luxury real estate portfolio combined. How long have you known about this? How long have you been sitting on this while letting Mom stress about her finances? My mother, Beatrice, pushed the door open, then followed closely by Trent. Clearly, Jasmine had already briefed them downstairs before storming up to confront me. Beatrice's eyes were wide, her usual look of haughty disgust replaced by an insatiable naked greed. "Maya, is this true?" my mother demanded, her voice shaking as she stared at the paperwork on the desk. $5.2 million. Your father must have been out of his mind when he drew up that deed. That money belongs to the entire family legacy. It belongs to this household. Trent stepped forward, smoothly sliding past my mother. His earlier embarrassment from the dining room table had completely vanished, replaced by the predatory focus of a financial opportunist who smelled blood in the water. He straightened his designer watch and adopted his best, most patronizing professional tone. "Let us everyone take a deep breath and look at this logically," Trent said, flashing a slick, manipulative smile that did not reach his cold eyes. "Maya, this is an incredibly complex situation. A multi-million-dollar commercial land asset in a high-tech zone is not something you can just handle on your own. You do not have an investment background. You do not understand zoning laws, capital gains taxes, or corporate shell structures. If you try to manage this yourself, the state and the developers will absolutely chew you up and spit you out. You will lose everything to taxes and bad negotiations." He leaned against the edge of my desk, invading my personal space, trying to project dominant authority. "As the family's investment director, it is my responsibility to protect our assets," Trent continued, his voice dripping with forced benevolence. "Here is what we are going to do. Jasmine and I will have our corporate attorney draw up an immediate asset transfer agreement. We will move the deed under my investment firm's management portfolio. I will handle the developers, handle the negotiations, and insulate you from the financial liability. It is the only sensible choice. You clearly do not have the financial capacity to navigate a $5 million corporate transaction." Jasmine nodded vigorously, her jealousy transforming into desperate cooperation with her husband. "Exactly," Jasmine chimed in, crossing her arms. "You are a remote worker, Maya. You sit in your room all day. You do not know how the real business world works. Trent manages millions for high-profile clients every single day. For your own safety, you need to sign this over to him immediately." "My mother." Beatrice stepped closer, her hand reaching out in a rare gesture of affection that felt entirely transactional. "Sign the papers when Trent gets them ready, Maya," she ordered, her tone shifting back to her usual commanding authority. "It is for the good of the family. We can use that money to expand Jasmine's real estate firm and secure our family's status at the country club. You will still be taken care of. Trent will give you a modest monthly allowance so you do not have to worry about your little bills." I looked at the three of them. I looked at my sister, whose greed had completely wiped away any sense of familial love. I looked at my mother, who was already spending my inheritance in her head to buy social validation from her wealthy friends. And I looked at Trent, the white brother-in-law, who thought his corporate title and skin color gave him the right to dictate my worth and steal my father's final gift. They honestly believed that because I had been quiet for 32 years, I was stupid. They honestly believed they could gaslight me into thinking I was too incompetent to own what was rightfully mine. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea that the tech infrastructure they were so eager to negotiate with was a world I already commanded. I calmly reached out my hand. Before Jasmine or Trent could realize what I was doing, I forcefully snatched the manila folder and the county documents off the desk, pulling them back into my possession. I stood up slowly, facing the three of them, and let a cold, mocking smile spread across my face. "My assets do not need a handout from outsiders," I said, my voice ice cold. Beatrice's face contorted with a rage so absolute it made her tremble. She stepped right up to me, pointing a manicured finger inches from my face. "You ungrateful, arrogant little girl," she spat out. "How dare you speak to your brother-in-law that way? Trent is a respected financial director offering to save you from your own stupidity. You are mentally unstable. We all know it. You have been sick in the head for years, and now you are trying to lose this entire family's assets just out of pure, petty spite." I stared at the finger pointing at me, completely unfazed by her theatrical outrage. "My family's assets?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That is a very interesting choice of words, Mother. Since when does a gift left exclusively to me by my father constitute family property?" "Because you are a part of this family, whether you act like it or not," Beatrice yelled, her voice echoing off the walls of my bedroom. "Everything we have belongs to the legacy of this household. We share our burdens and we share our blessings." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Share our blessings. Is that what we are calling it now? Is that the same principle you applied 7 years ago when you hacked into my joint savings account?" The room suddenly felt very small. Beatrice's jaw clamped shut, and Jasmine took a nervous step back. I watched the blood drain from my mother's face as I forced the ugliest skeleton in our family closet out into the open. "You remember that? Do you not, Mom?" I continued, my voice dangerously quiet. "I had worked 2 jobs through college, saving every single dime to fund my first business. I had $40,000 in an account that still had your name on it from when I was a teenager. And then miraculously, a week before Jasmine's lavish country club wedding, my account was drained to zero." Jasmine crossed her arms defensively. "That was a family emergency. We had vendor deposits due, and Trent's family was flying in from out of state. We could not look poor in front of his parents. You were living rent-free, so you owed us." "I owed you a $40,000 ice sculpture and a premium open bar," I shot back, locking eyes with my sister. "You stole my future to buy your fake luxury lifestyle. You bankrupted my first business before it even got off the ground, which pushed me into the exact mental breakdown you all love to mock me for. You drove me to the edge, and now you have the nerve to stand in my room and call me unstable to justify stealing from me a second time." Beatrice slapped her hand hard against the top of my desk. "That is exactly the kind of delusional, paranoid thinking that proves you are not fit to handle this money," she yelled, her eyes wild with desperation. "You hold on to these petty grudges because your brain is sick. You are a sick, irrational girl who cannot see reality. Jasmine is your sister. She deserved a proper wedding to secure a successful man like Trent. That was an investment in our family's social standing. And this land is the exact same thing. It is our ticket to generational wealth, and I will be damned if I let a mentally ill dropout squander it away." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. There was not a single ounce of maternal love in her eyes, only a ravenous, bottomless greed. She had rewritten history so completely in her own mind that she actually believed her theft was justified. She genuinely believed that feeding Jasmine's ego was worth starving my soul. "I am not signing anything," I said, my tone absolute and final. "I will not hand over the deed to Trent. I will not put it in a family trust. And if any of you try to access my mail or my financial documents again, I will have you arrested for federal mail tampering. Get out of my room." For a second, nobody moved. The sheer force of my refusal hung heavily in the air. Jasmine looked like she was going to scream, her chest heaving with silent fury. Beatrice looked utterly bewildered that her usual tactics of verbal abuse and gaslighting were bouncing right off me. But it was Trent who broke the silence. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he let out a slow, dark chuckle that sent a chill down my spine. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and the doorway. He casually adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit, looking at me with the cold, calculating expression of a predator assessing its trapped prey. "You think you hold all the cards because your name is on a piece of paper?" Trent said, a wicked smirk twisting his lips. "You think you can just say no and we will walk away? That is incredibly naive, Maya." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. "We tried to do this the easy way. We tried to let you surrender the asset quietly and with dignity. But if you will not sign it over voluntarily, we will simply take the choice out of your hands. If you do not sign, we have ways to make the law force you to hand it over to someone more capable. His threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, but I simply stared right through him until he finally backed down and left my room, taking my mother and sister with him. For 3 days, a suffocating silence fell over the entire house. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody made eye contact. They were busy scheming behind closed doors, and I let them. I knew they were desperate to get their hands on my $5 million property, but I severely underestimated just how low they were willing to sink to secure their prize. The ambush happened on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of black coffee when Jasmine marched into the room. She was wearing her sharpest power suit, looking every bit the ruthless, status-obsessed real estate broker she pretended to be. She did not say hello. She just slammed a massive, heavy legal binder directly onto the marble countertop right in front of my mug. The loud smack echoed through the kitchen. I looked down at the thick stack of papers. The top sheet had the official seal of the county family court. Bold black letters across the top read, "Petition for Emergency Conservatorship." "I warned you," Maya Jasmine said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Trent and I do not make empty threats. You are going to sign the deed over to his management firm right now, or my lawyer files this entire binder with the judge tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. I slowly opened the binder and my blood ran ice cold. Inside was a complete nightmare of fabricated evidence. There were sworn affidavits from my mother and Jasmine detailing completely fake episodes of my supposed erratic behavior over the past 6 months. But the worst part was the medical section. They had somehow managed to get their hands on my psychiatric records from my burnout 5 years ago, and they had doctored them. They clearly paid off a shady private psychologist to review my old files and write a brand new, highly exaggerated evaluation. This fake report claimed I suffered from severe delusions, paranoia, and was entirely incapable of managing my own basic life decisions, let alone a multi-million-dollar commercial asset. They were not just trying to steal my land anymore. They were actively trying to strip away my basic human rights. A conservatorship meant they would legally own me. They would control my bank accounts, my medical decisions, my freedom to travel, and every single asset attached to my name. They were willing to legally enslave their own flesh and blood just to fund their fake luxury lifestyle and save Trent from whatever financial mess he was hiding. My mother, Beatrice, walked into the kitchen, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jasmine. She refused to look me in the eye, focusing her gaze on the kitchen wall instead. "We are doing this out of love," Maya Beatrice recited, sounding like she had rehearsed the line 50 times in the mirror. "You need supervision. You are a danger to yourself. Just sign the transfer papers to Trent and we will make this ugly court business go away. We will let you stay in your room and we will take care of you." I looked at the two women who were supposed to be my family. There was no reasoning with them. There was no appealing to a conscience that simply did not exist. They had drawn their line in the sand, and they fully expected me to collapse into a sobbing, compliant mess. They thought the threat of being declared legally incompetent would terrify me into signing away my father's final gift. But they were deeply mistaken. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not tear the papers up. I simply closed the binder, pushed it back across the marble counter toward Jasmine, and gave her a chillingly calm smile. "Do whatever you feel you need to do," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "And I will do exactly what I need to do." I stood up and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them completely speechless. They thought I was retreating to my room to panic. They thought they had won, but the game had only just begun. That night at exactly 2 in the morning, the house was completely silent. I stood in the center of the room I had occupied for far too long. I zipped up a sleek black duffel bag containing only my absolute essentials, my encrypted laptops, my hard drives, and my personal identification. Everything else, the clothes, the memories, the desperate childhood attachments to this toxic household I left behind. I wiped my devices from the home network, ensuring not a single digital footprint was left for Trent to try and track. I walked down the staircase without making a single sound. I did not leave a note. I did not look back at the walls that had served as my emotional prison for decades. I stepped out of the front door into the cool, crisp night air and walked down the driveway. I did not call a cab. I did not hail a rideshare. As I reached the corner of the street, a massive custom-tinted black SUV pulled up silently to the curb. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the quiet suburban street. The driver, wearing a sharp, tailored suit, immediately stepped out and opened the back door for me. He took my heavy duffel bag with a respectful nod. "Good evening, boss," he said quietly. "Are we heading to the corporate penthouse?" I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, settling into the pristine interior. I stared out the tinted window at the house that had tried to break me one last time. "Yes," I replied smoothly as the heavy door clicked shut. "It is time to go to work." As the SUV glided away into the night, the era of the quiet, obedient sister officially died. The legal war had just begun, and my family had absolutely no idea the level of absolute hell they had just invited into their lives. Within 48 hours of my midnight departure, the family court officially accepted Jasmine's emergency petition. That was the moment Trent decided to flex his corporate muscles. He wanted to make sure I felt the full, crushing weight of his financial authority. He wanted me starved out, isolated, and crawling back to their doorstep on my hands and knees. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I had just stepped out to grab a black coffee near my new temporary base of operations. When I handed the barista my personal debit card, the card reader beeped a loud, obnoxious red. "Declined." I pulled out my backup credit card, the one linked to my personal checking account. Declined again. I politely stepped aside, opened my personal banking app on my phone, and was greeted by a stark red banner across the top of my screen. "Account frozen pending legal review." My phone buzzed almost immediately. It was a text message from Trent. He could not resist gloating. "The law moves fast when you know the right people, Maya. Your accounts are completely locked until the judge officially appoints me as your financial guardian. Come home, sign the deed, and I will make sure your cards work again. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You have no money and nowhere to go." He actually thought he had checkmated me. Trent had used the pending conservatorship petition combined with a few well-placed calls to his high-powered banking associates to freeze my personal accounts. He used legal loopholes to lock down my identity. He wanted to paralyze me financially, so I could not hire a lawyer to fight back. What he had frozen were my surface-level accounts. The accounts I used to pay for groceries, cheap clothes, and my modest apartment rent, so my family would never suspect a single thing about my actual wealth. He thought he had cut off my entire life supply. He had no idea he had barely scratched the paint on the front door. While Trent was executing his financial siege, my mother was launching a full-scale psychological war. I found out about her performance when my phone rang later that afternoon. It was Aunt Sarah, a sweet but incredibly gullible woman from our family church. She was crying so hysterically, she could barely form a coherent sentence. "Maya, baby, we are all praying for you so hard," Aunt Sarah sobbed through the speaker. "Your mother stood up at the pulpit during Sunday service. She broke down in tears in front of the entire congregation. She told Pastor Thomas and all the elders that you are suffering from severe schizophrenia. She said you ran away in a manic state, that you are having violent delusions, and that they are desperately trying to get legal control to save your life." The whole church laid hands on her. "We prayed for your safe return to a mental health facility. Please tell me where you are so I can send help." My mother was playing the role of the century. She was securing the public narrative before I even had a chance to speak. By painting herself as the tragic, long-suffering matriarch, doing everything she could to save her dangerously unhinged daughter, she made herself bulletproof. If anyone in our community questioned why I was suddenly dragged into a courtroom, Beatrice had already primed them to believe it was a medical rescue mission, not a multi-million-dollar heist. She was actively using God the pastor and the entire congregation as a human shield for her own insatiable greed. She was making sure that if I ever tried to tell the truth, everyone would just shake their heads with pity and say it was just the schizophrenia talking. Aunt Sarah begged me again to tell her where I was hiding so she could send an ambulance. I kept my voice incredibly soft and steady. I gently told her that I was perfectly safe, thanked her for her prayers, and calmly ended the call. I set the phone down on a massive polished mahogany desk. Trent and Beatrice thought I was currently shivering in some dark alley. They pictured me panicking in a cheap motel room, staring at my frozen bank app, crying over how I was going to afford my next meal. They fully expected me to call them begging for forgiveness by nightfall. But I was not shivering. I was standing in the center of a massive state-of-the-art corner office wrapped entirely in floor-to-ceiling glass. 50 stories below me, the downtown traffic moved like tiny, insignificant ants. Outside my office door, dozens of elite software engineers and security analysts moved briskly through a sleek, ultra-modern corporate headquarters. Servers hummed quietly in the secure, climate-controlled rooms down the hall. I looked at Trent's text message on my phone screen, threatening me with absolute poverty. I looked at the frozen banking app that held a meager $4,000. Then I casually swiped my finger across my encrypted secondary monitor. The screen illuminated, bypassing 3 layers of biometric security, and displayed the primary operational funds for my anonymous cybersecurity firm. The balance sat comfortably at $38 million, completely untouchable, perfectly legal, and entirely untraceable to the identity my family thought they knew. I did not scream. I did not panic. I simply placed my hands in the pockets of my tailored trousers, looked down at the sprawling city skyline through the glass, and let a faint, cold smile touch my lips. I stepped away from the glass window of my penthouse and requested a discreet private car to take me across town. Before completely severing my ties to my fabricated life, I needed to visit my old decoy apartment one last time. It was a tiny, rundown one-bedroom rental on the wrong side of the tracks that I intentionally maintained to keep my family convinced of my poverty. I had an old encrypted hard drive hidden beneath the floorboards there, containing early source code that I refused to leave behind. The moment I knelt on the faded beige carpet and pried up the loose wooden plank, a sharp, authoritative knock hammered against my thin front door. I slipped the hard drive into my jacket pocket, stood up, and opened the door. Jasmine stood in the dingy hallway wearing a perfectly tailored designer trench coat, looking utterly out of place among the peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. Beside her stood a stern-looking woman in a gray suit, holding a thick clipboard and wearing an official state identification badge. "Maya, thank goodness you are here," Jasmine gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in a flawless display of theatrical panic. "We have been worried sick about you. You just vanished in the middle of the night." The woman in the gray suit stepped forward, her expression completely devoid of warmth. "Hello, Maya," she said, her voice clinical and detached. "I am Mrs. Higgins from Adult Protective Services. Your family filed a severe concern report regarding your sudden disappearance, your mental stability, and your recent financial insolvency. We are here to conduct a mandatory welfare check to ensure you are not a danger to yourself." I stared at Jasmine, admiring the sheer audacity of her strategy. Freezing my bank accounts was not just a tactic to starve me out. It was a calculated setup to prove to the state that I was destitute and incapable of caring for myself. Jasmine had brought a government official here to legally document my empty refrigerator, my cheap furniture, and my locked debit cards as undeniable proof of my incompetence. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside and gesturing to the cramped living room. I kept my voice incredibly level, refusing to give them the hysterical reaction they were hunting for. Mrs. Higgins walked in, her eyes immediately scanning the sparse room. She took out her pen and began making notes. Jasmine followed close behind, adopting the posture of a terrified but devoted sister. "We just want to help you get better, Maya," Jasmine whimpered, clasping her hands together. "Trent told me your bank accounts are completely overdrawn. You have no money for groceries. Mom is beside herself with grief, thinking you are out here starving in a manic episode. Please let us take you to a facility where professionals can take care of you." I crossed my arms, staring directly into my sister's calculating eyes. "You are not here to help me, Jasmine. You are here to build a paper trail for the judge so you and Trent can steal the property Dad left me." Mrs. Higgins stopped writing and looked up, her brow furrowed. Maya, she said strictly. Paranoia and accusations against family members trying to assist you are classic signs of a mental health crisis. Your sister is very distressed. She is not distressed, I countered sharply, taking a step toward Jasmine. She is a fraud. She has been a fraud her entire life. Are you going to tell the social worker how you actually got your start in the luxury real estate market, Jasmine? Are you going to mention how you secured your prestigious university fellowship and that massive broker position? Jasmine blinked, her fake tears faltering for a fraction of a second. I have no idea what you're talking about. You are having an episode. I am talking about my master's thesis. I stated, my voice ringing clearly off the thin apartment walls. I am talking about the comprehensive commercial zoning and urban development model that I spent 2 years researching. You broke into my laptop, copied my entire project, slapped your name on the cover, and submitted it to the state board to win your first major position. Your entire career, your entire wealthy lifestyle is built on stolen intellectual property. You have always been a thief. Today is no different. Mrs. Higgins let out a sharp sigh, shaking her head as if dealing with a difficult child. She turned her back to us for just a moment to inspect the empty kitchen cabinets, checking for food supplies as part of her evaluation. In that brief, unguarded second, when the social worker was looking away, Jasmine dropped her terrified sister act completely. Her posture straightened. The fake concern vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, arrogant cruelty. She leaned in close to me, her expensive perfume masking the smell of the dusty apartment. Society only cares about who is on top, Jasmine whispered, a wicked, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. It does not matter what you know. It only matters who the world believes. And the world believes I am a success, and you are just a crazy broke girl who cannot even afford a loaf of bread. You will always be a loser. Get out of my apartment, I commanded, raising my voice just enough to carry authority. I stepped forward, pointing toward the door. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing. Mrs. Higgins whipped around at the sudden volume of my voice. The moment she turned, Jasmine instantly shrank back against the wall, throwing her hands up to protect her face as if I had just threatened to strike her. She let out a pathetic, trembling sob. See what I mean? Jasmine cried out, her voice quivering with manufactured terror as she looked at the social worker. She gets so aggressive out of nowhere. I am scared of her. She is completely out of touch with reality. Mrs. Higgins immediately stepped between us, holding her clipboard like a shield. Maya, you need to calm down immediately. The social worker scolded, her pen furiously, scratching across the official state forms. Aggressive behavior and paranoid delusions regarding your family's success are severely concerning. I am noting significant agitation and a hostile environment. I watched the pen move across the paper, documenting every single lie exactly according to Jasmine's carefully orchestrated script. My sister huddled behind the social worker, shooting me a victorious glare from over the woman's shoulder. They thought they had perfectly sealed my fate in ink. They thought this piece of paper would be the final nail in my coffin before the judge. I did not bother arguing with the social worker. I just watched them walk out of my apartment, knowing that the trap they just set for me was going to be the exact same one that would tear their lives to shreds in front of a federal court. I locked the door of that dingy, peeling apartment the second Jasmine and the social worker disappeared down the hallway. I did not waste another minute in that neighborhood. Within an hour, I was back in the sterile, climate-controlled sanctuary of my corporate penthouse, leaving the pathetic, fabricated drama of my supposed mental breakdown far behind me. Jasmine thought she had played a brilliant game of chess by bringing the state into our family dispute, but she was playing checkers on a board I had designed. I sat down at my primary workstation, a curved command center consisting of 3 massive monitors. The ambient lighting in my office automatically dimmed to a cool blue as my systems came online. I cracked my knuckles and let my fingers rest on the illuminated keyboard. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to find out exactly what was fueling this sudden, reckless desperation from my family. Jasmine was motivated by pure, unadulterated jealousy, but Trent was a different story. Trent was a calculating, arrogant man who prided himself on his pristine image as a high-powered, white-collar investment director. A forced conservatorship was a messy, highly public, and legally risky maneuver. It required paying off a shady doctor, bribing court clerks, and moving with a sloppy urgency that did not fit Trent's usual style. He was moving too fast, leaving too many digital fingerprints. People like Trent only make those kinds of reckless mistakes when they are terrified. I needed to know what he was running from. As the founder of an elite cybersecurity firm that actively audited massive financial institutions, navigating the digital architecture of Wall Street was essentially my native language. I did not need to perform any illegal hacking. People who think they are untouchable always leave a trail of breadcrumbs in semi-public domains, shadow ledgers, and unsecured routing numbers. I initiated a deep, comprehensive background audit on Trent's professional portfolio, his personal holdings, and the investment firm he supposedly directed. For the first hour, everything looked perfectly normal. His public-facing accounts reflected the exact luxury lifestyle he and Jasmine flaunted at Sunday dinners. But when I cross-referenced his public assets with his recent digital transaction signatures, the algorithm caught a massive discrepancy. I isolated the anomaly and instructed the system to dig deeper. Lines of data cascaded down my center monitor. Trent had been quietly setting up a series of offshore shell companies over the past 8 months. Interestingly, he had registered them using Jasmine's maiden name, a detail my sister was almost certainly completely ignorant of. He was using her as a blind shield for whatever he was hiding. I traced the wire transfers flowing through those shell accounts, and the pristine, arrogant facade of my brother-in-law completely shattered right before my eyes. Trent was not a financial genius. He was a degenerate gambler wearing a $3,000 suit. The data revealed a horrifying string of unauthorized, extremely high-risk derivatives trades. Trent had been secretly siphoning millions of dollars from his firm's top-tier client accounts to make massive leveraged bets against the market. He had played God with other people's wealth, convinced he could beat the system and pocket the returns before anyone noticed the funds were missing. But the market had violently turned against him. He had lost the bets catastrophically. My screen flashed with an undeniable, glaring red alert. Trent was facing a catastrophic margin call. He was exactly $4.5 million in the red. But the discovery did not stop there. The deeper I dug into the routing numbers, the worse it got for him. I intercepted a flagged encrypted compliance warning from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC had noticed the irregular liquidity in Trent's division. They had officially scheduled a comprehensive mandatory internal audit of his branch, and the federal auditors were set to open his books in exactly less than 30 days. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. This was never just about Jasmine's jealousy or my mother's desire to control me. This was a hostage situation for Trent's actual freedom. If Trent did not magically produce $4.5 million to replace the stolen client funds before the SEC auditors arrived, he was not just going to lose his luxury cars, his house, and his job. He was going to face 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. He was a drowning man. When he found out about the barren land my father had left me, land that was suddenly valued at $5.2 million, he saw his ultimate life raft. The money from my property was the exact amount he needed to secretly cover his stolen funds, pay off his margin calls, and still have a little left over to keep Jasmine draped in designer brands. But he needed the money immediately, and he could not wait for a normal property sale. He needed me declared legally incompetent so he could seize the asset, liquidate it through his firm overnight, and save himself from federal prison. He was willing to lock me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life, just to cover up his own financial crimes. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the damning evidence illuminating my dark office. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or panic. Instead, a deep, chilling sense of absolute power washed over me. With surgical precision, I initiated a secure download protocol. I pulled every single transaction log, every hidden routing number, every piece of documentation regarding his shell companies, and the impending SEC audit notice. I compiled everything into a single irrefutable digital dossier of Trent's corporate felonies. I wrapped the entire file in military-grade encryption, locking it behind a biometric firewall that only I could access. Trent thought he was the apex predator. He thought he could use his corporate title and his white privilege to steamroll over the quiet, mentally fragile sister-in-law. He thought he was holding all the cards. He had absolutely no idea that by trying to bury me, he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to completely annihilate his entire existence. I picked up my secure mobile device and dialed a number that very few people had access to. The phone rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. It was Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not just a lawyer, he was a legal executioner. A former federal prosecutor, he was a brilliant, no-nonsense black attorney who had spent a decade locking up corrupt Wall Street executives before moving to the private sector. He was the lead corporate counsel for my cybersecurity firm, and he was the absolute last person Trent would ever want to face in a courtroom. "Good evening, Maya," Marcus said, his tone crisp and professional. "To what do I owe the pleasure at this hour?" "I need to initiate a personal legal defense," I replied smoothly. "My family has just filed an emergency conservatorship petition against me. They submitted doctored medical records claiming I am severely mentally unstable, and my brother-in-law Trent is petitioning to become my permanent financial guardian." There was a sharp, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, the professional warmth was completely gone, replaced by the lethal focus of a prosecutor preparing for war. "Send me the docket number immediately," Marcus commanded. "I will draft an emergency injunction tonight. We will file a countermotion by dawn. I will pull your perfectly spotless medical history, your corporate tax returns, and your psychological evaluations. We will walk into that courthouse tomorrow morning and absolutely bury this petition before the judge even has time to blink. I will make sure your brother-in-law faces severe sanctions for filing a frivolous claim." It was the standard aggressive legal response. It was exactly what a high-powered attorney should do to protect his billionaire client from a fraudulent family attack. But it was not what I wanted. "No," I said. "Do not file an injunction. Do not block the petition." Marcus stopped typing on his end. "Maya," he said, his voice laced with genuine confusion, "they have frozen your public bank accounts. They are trying to legally strip you of your human rights. If we do not block this immediately, they will drag you into a courtroom and humiliate you on public record." Why on earth would we let them proceed? Because stopping Trent now is a mercy he does not deserve. I explained, leaning back in my chair and watching the city lights flicker outside my window. If we block the petition tomorrow, the judge dismisses it as a petty family dispute. Trent gets a warning, maybe a small fine, and he walks away free. He will just find another way to steal what he needs. We are not going to give him a slap on the wrist. We are going to give him a federal prison sentence. I heard Marcus shift in his chair. "I am listening," he murmured. I outlined exactly what my digital audit had uncovered. I told Marcus about the offshore shell companies, the disastrous margin call, the stolen client funds, and the impending audit from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I explained that Trent was not just greedy. He was a desperate drowning criminal looking for a $5 million life raft. "If Trent wants to be granted legal control over my assets," I continued, my voice steady and calculated, "the family court is going to require him to prove that he is a fiscally responsible guardian. He will have to submit his personal financial records, his investment portfolio, and his corporate disclosures to the judge. He will have to do it under penalty of perjury." A deep, resonant chuckle echoed over the phone line. Marcus instantly saw the invisible web I was weaving. "He is in the red for $4.5 million, Marcus said, the realization clicking into place. "If he submits his real financial records, the judge will immediately deny the conservatorship and report his insolvency. So to win control of your land, he has to submit forged financial documents to the family court." "Exactly," I smiled. "If we stop him now, he only committed civil fraud against me. But if we stand back, say absolutely nothing, and let him walk into that courthouse and hand those fake financial statements directly to a sitting judge, he commits perjury, he commits federal fraud. He hands the court the exact evidence they need to lock him away for a decade." It was a breathtakingly ruthless strategy, and Marcus knew it. It required me to endure weeks of public humiliation. It meant I had to sit quietly while my mother painted me as a lunatic to everyone in our community. It meant I had to let Jasmine and Trent believe they had utterly destroyed me. But the payoff would be absolute devastation for my enemies. "You are asking me to let them win the preliminary rounds," Marcus said, a tone of deep respect lacing his words. "You want me to play the role of a helpless, overwhelmed public defender while they build their own gallows?" "I want you to make them feel invincible," I replied. "Let them submit every single piece of fake evidence they want. Let them build a mountain of lies. When the time is right, we will bring the entire mountain down on their heads. Prepare our evidence, Marcus, but keep it entirely off the record until I give the signal." "Understood," Marcus said. "The trap is set, Maya. We will let them walk right into it." I ended the call and turned my attention back to my monitors. Over the next 48 hours, I monitored the county court's digital docket system. I watched as Trent's highly paid legal team aggressively pushed the paperwork through the system. They were moving with a frantic, desperate speed, terrified that the SEC auditors would arrive before they could liquidate my land. Then, on late Thursday afternoon, the notification flashed across my screen. The plaintiff Trent had officially filed Exhibit B with the family court. It was a comprehensive declaration of his financial stability, signed and sworn under oath, asserting that he had the flawless financial background necessary to manage my estate. I downloaded the file and cross-referenced it with the real data I had pulled from his shadow accounts. As expected, the court filing was a complete work of fiction. He had inflated his assets, hidden his massive margin debt, and explicitly lied about the status of his firm's client funds. By officially submitting that forged document to the judge, Trent had crossed the point of no return. He had willingly tightened the noose around his own neck. He thought he had successfully cornered a weak, defenseless woman. He did not realize that the heavy metal door of the trap had just slammed completely shut behind him, locking him inside with a predator he never even saw coming. The weekend passed in a blur of silent, calculated preparation. By Monday morning, while my mother was undoubtedly sitting in her church pew, weeping fake tears and begging the congregation to pray for my supposed psychological collapse, I was stepping into a bespoke, tailored suit. I bypassed the casual attire I usually wore to blend in and dressed for the corporate warfare that was about to unfold. I walked into my high-tech command center, the panoramic glass walls flooding the room with sharp, bright morning light. It was time for the world to see the ghost they had been hunting. I sat at the head of my massive conference table and activated the secure encrypted video network. Instantly, 50 high-resolution squares populated my wall-sized monitor. These were the top-tier executives, lead security architects, and senior vice presidents of my company, Obsidian Cybernetics. For years, the industry only knew me by my reputation. I was the anonymous founder who had built a $30 million enterprise from absolute scratch, securing government contracts and Fortune 500 data systems. My board members and senior staff were the only ones who knew my true face. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the secure channel. "Let us get straight to the quarterly review." The meeting commenced with the kind of ruthless efficiency I demanded from my team. We went over the revenue reports, the successful neutralization of 3 foreign cyber attacks on our clients, and the expansion of our cloud infrastructure. It was a symphony of elite corporate success. As I listened to my vice president of operations detail our massive profit margins, I could not help but think about Trent standing in that family court, handing a judge a piece of paper that claimed I was a penniless, mentally ill dependent who needed a monthly allowance. The sheer breathtaking irony of it almost made me laugh out loud. As we reached the final agenda item, my chief financial officer, a brilliant man named David, cleared his throat. He pulled up a highly classified document onto the shared screen. "Madam CEO." David began projecting a new portfolio. "We just finalized the bidding war for the Apex contract late last night. We secured the deal. It is the largest private sector audit we have taken on this year." I leaned forward, steepling my fingers. "Give me the summary, David." "The client is Sterling Vanguard Investment Bank," David reported. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has flagged massive liquidity anomalies, in their Southern Regional Division. The federal regulators essentially forced the bank's board of directors to hire an independent top-tier cybersecurity firm to conduct a mandatory comprehensive sweep of all their executive ledgers, offshore routing compliance, and hidden transaction histories. They need us to find out exactly where the bleeding is coming from before the feds raid the building. The name of the bank hit my ears like a perfectly timed strike of lightning. Sterling Vanguard. I kept my face completely impassive, but my heart began to pound with a thrilling, dangerous rhythm. I reached out and tapped my secondary monitor, quickly accessing the bank's public corporate directory. I scrolled past the senior partners and board members until I found the regional division list. There it was, staring back at me in high-definition, bold letters. Trent Lawson, Director of Regional Investments. Trent's bank had not just hired a security firm. Terrified of the impending federal investigation, the top executives of his institution had unknowingly handed the master keys of their entire financial architecture directly to me. Trent was currently spending thousands of dollars on shady lawyers to legally steal my $5 million property so he could cover his tracks. He had absolutely no idea that his own bosses had just hired his supposedly crazy broke sister-in-law to hunt him down. David continued speaking, oblivious to the cosmic justice unfolding on my screen. I have already assigned our top red team to the Sterling Vanguard account. They will begin the remote infiltration protocols this afternoon. We expect to crack their encrypted ledgers by Wednesday. I reached out and pressed the master override button on my console, silencing the entire virtual boardroom. 50 executives stared back at me in complete silence. "Stand the red team down, David," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, absolute register. David blinked, visibly confused. "Boss, this is a massive contract. We need our best analysts on those servers immediately if we are going to beat the SEC deadline." "I am aware of the deadline," I replied, standing up slowly and buttoning my suit jacket. "But I am taking point on this account. I will be handling the Sterling Vanguard audit personally." A murmur of surprise rippled across the secure network. As the CEO, I had not personally conducted a field audit or manually breached a client's server in over 3 years. My time was far too valuable to spend in the trenches. But this was not just another corporate contract. This was personal execution. "Send the bank's board of directors a formal notification," I instructed my team, my eyes fixed on Trent's smiling corporate headshot on my side monitor. "Tell them the founder of Obsidian Cybernetics is taking a direct personal interest in their regional investment division. Prepare the infiltration protocols and grant me absolute, unrestricted administrative access to their entire mainframe." I terminated the video conference, leaving the massive screen completely black. Trent had brought a fake medical file and a cheap lawyer to a family dispute. He wanted to play God with my life and steal my future to save his own skin. He thought he was safe behind his luxury suit, his corner office, and his arrogant white privilege. But he had just invited the Grim Reaper into his digital sanctuary. I was not just going to hack his system from the shadows. I was going to walk right through the front door of his pristine financial institution, tear his entire criminal empire down to the studs, and watch him suffocate in the ruins. I initiated the primary infiltration sequence at exactly midnight. With the board of directors providing full administrative authorization, I bypassed Sterling Vanguard's external firewalls and plugged directly into their central financial mainframe. It was like walking into a massive, unguarded vault. I did not waste time looking at the overall corporate structure. I deployed my proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm, a relentless digital bloodhound that I had coded from scratch. It was designed specifically to hunt for financial camouflage, seeking out hidden ledgers, shadow accounts, and buried transactions that standard banking compliance software was programmed to ignore. I commanded the system to focus its entire processing power on the Southern Regional Division. I gave it a specific, highly prioritized target: Trent Lawson. The results did not take days to manifest. They took exactly 14 minutes. My massive curved monitors lit up with a blinding cascade of red security alerts. The depth of the corruption was staggering. Trent was not just struggling with a catastrophic margin call, he was operating a full-scale, sophisticated money laundering syndicate right under the noses of his elite banking superiors. I sat back in my leather chair and watched the raw data compile in real time, exposing the ugly truth behind my sister's luxury lifestyle. Trent had systematically siphoned millions of dollars from high-yield retirement accounts. He specifically targeted the portfolios of the bank's elderly and most vulnerable clients, knowing they rarely checked their daily transaction logs. He moved the stolen funds through a dizzying complex maze of phantom shell companies. Every single one of those fake corporations was registered under Jasmine's maiden name, effectively framing his own wife for federal wire fraud. Once the money was washed through those domestic shells, he funneled the clean cash directly into untraceable offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. He was desperately trying to legitimize his stolen wealth to cover his massive, crippling trading losses before the regulators caught on. A notification suddenly popped up on my secondary monitor. It was an encrypted email flagged with high priority from the regional director himself. Trent was officially reaching out to the anonymous audit team. I opened the message. He wrote with his usual arrogant, condescending tone, projecting the false confidence of an untouchable corporate elite. He offered his full cooperation, but firmly suggested that the audit team restrict their search parameters exclusively to the public corporate accounts, citing strict client confidentiality agreements. He even had the sheer audacity to attach a doctored financial spreadsheet to the email. It was the exact same fake financial report he had proudly submitted to the family court to prove his stability and demand control of my estate. I read his email and let out a cold, sharp laugh that echoed in the empty penthouse office. Trent thought he was dealing with some generic, low-level corporate IT department. He thought he could bully a group of faceless auditors into looking the other way with a few authoritative buzzwords. He had absolutely no idea that the silent, omnipotent force tearing through his digital fortress, ripping the doors off his deepest secrets, was the supposedly mentally ill sister-in-law he had just tried to lock inside a psychiatric ward. He was trying to dictate terms to the executioner. I did not reply to his email. I did not need to engage in a meaningless back and forth with a dead man walking. I simply typed a single line of command code into my console, instructing my system to aggressively bypass his restricted folders and rip the encrypted locks off his hidden offshore routing numbers. I watched as the absolute entirety of his financial crimes downloaded directly onto my secure local server. Every illegal wire transfer, every fake invoice, every forged signature, and every single offshore account balance was laid bare on my screen. He had left a digital blood trail a mile wide, and I had just captured every single drop. I highlighted the massive master directory and initiated the final, most crucial protocol. I applied the official cryptographic seal of Obsidian Cybernetics to the downloaded dossier. The digital stamp burned onto the files, certifying the data as a verified, legally binding, independent audit. By stamping those files, I transformed them from raw, intercepted data into ironclad, admissible federal evidence. There was no going back for him now. He could not delete the files. He could not claim he was hacked. The independent audit was officially finalized and sealed by a government-approved contractor. It was the ultimate, inescapable death warrant for Trent's career and his freedom. I transferred the finalized sealed dossier onto a sleek titanium flash drive. I pulled the drive from the port and held the small, cold metal device in the palm of my hand. The weight of it felt immense. This tiny piece of hardware contained the power to completely destroy my arrogant brother-in-law. The entire timeline of his fake corporate success, his fake wealth, and his impending federal prison sentence was now resting comfortably in the palm of my hand. I slid the titanium flash drive into the secure inner pocket of my blazer. Trent's entire life was now a localized file on my person, but my work was not finished. The digital execution for my brother-in-law was prepared, but I needed to ensure the psychological trap for the rest of my family was equally inescapable. Right on cue, the secure line on my desk console began to ring. The caller identification displayed a name I had not saved in my personal contacts for years. It simply read, Beatrice. I did not answer immediately. I tapped a sequence on my secondary monitor, routing the incoming call through my company's corporate compliance recording system. Because my headquarters operated and routed communications through a strict single-party consent jurisdiction, every word spoken on this official business line was legally captured and fully admissible in a federal court. The red recording indicator pulsed steadily on my screen, locking onto the incoming audio. I pressed the connect button and put the call on speaker, leaning back in my leather chair. Maya, oh my sweet girl, please tell me you are safe. The fake sobbing was absolutely Oscar-worthy. Beatrice sounded like a woman on the absolute brink of a maternal collapse. Her voice shook with a heavily manufactured tremble, playing the role of the devastated, loving matriarch to absolute perfection. We have been out of our minds with worry, she cried, her breath hitching dramatically. Jasmine has not slept a single wink, and Trent has been calling every hospital in the state looking for you. You terrified us by running away like that in the middle of the night. I stared at the audio waveforms spiking up and down on my monitor, translating her fake tears into digital data. I am perfectly fine, Mother, I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion, offering her absolutely nothing to work with. Beatrice sniffled loudly, a wet, dramatic sound designed to provoke guilt. You are not fine, Maya. You are sick. You are having an episode just like you did 5 years ago when your little business idea failed. But we are your family, and we want to protect you. We do not want to drag you through a humiliating public trial in front of a judge. We do not want the whole city and everyone at our church to see you in this tragic, unstable state. I remained completely silent, letting her uncomfortable pause stretch out over the line. I wanted her to fill the empty space with her own traps. What exactly are you suggesting? I finally asked, feeding her the exact prompt she needed to continue her carefully rehearsed script. Trent found a wonderful, highly private psychiatric facility upstate. Beatrice whispered, her tone suddenly dropping into a register dripping with toxic sweetness. It is very discreet, Maya. It looks just like a luxury resort. If you just come home right now, hand over the property deed to Trent so he can manage that stressful land for you. We will drive you to the clinic ourselves. You can check in voluntarily. We can tell the congregation and all of our friends that you went on a long, restorative wellness retreat. No court battles, no embarrassing public records. We can protect the family name Maya, and you can finally get the serious medical help you so desperately need. I looked out at the sprawling city skyline through my office glass. She wanted me to voluntarily commit myself to a mental asylum so they could quietly liquidate my $5 million property without a judge ever asking me a single question. She was actively offering me a padded cell and heavy medication in exchange for my entire future, all neatly disguised as an act of maternal grace. I let a long, heavy silence stretch over the line. I wanted to give her one final opportunity, one last microscopic chance to show a single shred of genuine human decency before I let her burn to the ground. Mother, I said softly, stripping away the impenetrable armor I had worn for the past week. Before I make any decisions about my life or my property, I need you to answer one question honestly. Through all of this, through my entire life growing up in that house, did you ever actually believe in me? The fake crying stopped instantly. The line went dead quiet for 3 agonizing seconds. When Beatrice spoke again, the sweet, concerned mother completely vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating narcissist she truly was. The mask slipped, shattering into a million pieces. Believe in you, Beatrice scoffed, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous sneer. You have been nothing but a heavy burden since the day you were born. You were a weird, antisocial child who grew into a depressed, failed adult. I spent my entire life pouring all my energy into polishing Jasmine into a perfect reflection of this family, and I had to constantly hide you in the background so your failures would not ruin our image at the country club. You are not a success, Maya. You are a stain on my legacy. You have always been my biggest regret. Her cruel words echoed through my silent office, but instead of breaking my heart, they set me entirely free. The last invisible chain tethering me to her approval snapped. Now Beatrice commanded, her voice turning vicious and sharp. You are going to sign that deed over to Trent today, or I swear to God I will stand up in that courtroom and tell the judge such horrible things about your mental state that they will lock you away in a state facility and throw away the key. You will never see the outside of a hospital room again. Do not test me, Maya. Thank you for your honesty, Beatrice, I said calmly, my voice steady as solid rock. I will see you in court. I did not wait for her to scream her response. I reached out and tapped the end call button on my console. The audio waveforms flattened into a straight line. The red recording indicator stopped flashing. I clicked the mouse, dragging the high-resolution audio file into a secure digital folder labeled Exhibit A. I pressed the Save Recording button, officially locking the file into the encrypted drive alongside Trent's financial death warrant. The undeniable, legally binding evidence of my own mother's malice was now complete. I backed up the audio file to 3 separate encrypted offshore servers. The digital vault was now fully armed and locked. Tomorrow morning, that vault would detonate inside a federal courtroom, and the shockwave would permanently level the false empire my family had built. The sun had long since set, casting the sprawling city below into a glittering grid of neon and headlights. I walked away from the command console and moved into the private residential wing of my penthouse. The silence up here was absolute, a stark contrast to the frantic, panicked energy I knew was currently suffocating my mother's house. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, letting the steam rise in the cool, climate-controlled air. For the first time in 5 years, my heart beat with a steady, unshakable rhythm. There was no anxiety. There was no fear of what the morning would bring. There was only the cold, sharp focus of a predator waiting for the sun to rise. My private cell phone vibrated against the marble surface of the kitchen island. Only a handful of people still had this old number. I walked over and glanced down at the illuminated screen. It was Jasmine. Even now, mere hours before they planned to stand in front of a judge and legally enslave me. My golden sister could not resist the urge to twist the knife one last time. She needed to feel superior. She needed to feed her incredibly fragile ego to calm her own nerves before stepping into a courtroom. I picked up the device and opened the text. Make sure you actually shower and dress decently tomorrow morning. Maya. Her message read, the toxic condescension practically dripping through the screen. Try to borrow something that actually fits if you have to. I am bringing a few of my top real estate colleagues to the courthouse for moral support, and I do not want people thinking I have a sister who is both completely crazy and embarrassingly poor. Do not make this any more humiliating for our family than it already is. I read the message twice, and a genuine, effortless smile spread across my face. Jasmine was so deeply blinded by her own manufactured superiority that she could not see the massive freight train barreling directly toward her. She was worried about my clothes. She was worried about her local real estate colleagues seeing me in cheap retail brands. She had absolutely no clue that her supposedly brilliant wealthy husband was currently $4.5 million in the red. She did not know that the federal government was preparing to raid his banking division. And she certainly did not know that by tomorrow afternoon, her perfect luxury lifestyle would be entirely wiped off the face of the earth. She was obsessing over the aesthetics of a ship that was already sitting at the bottom of the ocean. I set my teacup down on the counter. I did not write a long defensive paragraph defending my sanity. I did not try to justify myself, argue with her toxic delusions, or beg her to call off the hearing. Let her bring her colleagues. Let her bring the entire city to watch if she wanted to. The larger the audience, the more spectacular her public destruction would be. I simply typed 5 words and hit send. See you in court, Jasmine. I turned off my phone screen and tossed the device onto the counter, effectively severing my final tie to their delusion. Taking my teacup, I walked out of the kitchen and stepped into my sprawling, custom-built walk-in closet. The space was pristine, organized with military precision. I walked straight past the oversized hoodies, faded jeans, and casual streetwear I used for my undercover life. I bypassed the plain outfits I wore to blend into the background of their Sunday dinners. I stopped at the very end of the room, standing before a specialized climate-controlled glass display case. Hanging perfectly under a specialized garment bag was the armor I had commissioned exactly for this moment. I unzipped the bag, revealing a breathtaking custom-tailored Italian silk suit. It was an absolute masterpiece of high fashion, cut with razor-sharp precision and spun from a midnight blue fabric that cost more per yard than my sister's monthly mortgage payment. It was paired with a crisp imported silk blouse, a set of handcrafted leather stilettos, and a subtle yet undeniably expensive platinum timepiece. The entire ensemble was worth easily over $15,000. It did not scream new money or flashy desperation. It whispered absolute, untouchable, terrifying corporate power. I sat down on the velvet sofa in the center of the closet, taking a slow sip of my tea, while my eyes traced the flawless silhouette of the suit. Trent would walk into that courtroom wearing his usual off-the-rack financial district uniform, thinking he looked like a titan of industry. Jasmine would wear something overly branded and flashy to prove her status to the gallery. Beatrice would wear her finest church dress to play the role of the tragic suffering mother. They thought they were showing up to a slaughter where I was the sacrificial lamb. They fully expected me to walk through those heavy oak doors looking disheveled, defeated, and exactly like the broken, insane dropout they had spent 5 years telling everyone I was. I took one last sip of my tea, feeling the warmth settle in my chest. Tomorrow I was not walking into that courtroom as their victim. I was walking in as the executioner. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open precisely at 9 in the morning. I walked down the center aisle with Marcus Thorne right beside me. The gallery was packed. Jasmine had clearly spent the entire weekend rallying her troops. She had brought her top-tier real estate colleagues, members of her country club, and half the congregation from my mother's church, including a very tearful Aunt Sarah. They were all sitting in the wooden pews, waiting to watch the tragic spectacle of my legal enslavement. As I took my seat at the defense table, I felt the collective stare of 50 people burning into my back. I did not turn around. I simply smoothed the skirt of my midnight blue Italian silk suit, rested my hands on the mahogany table, and locked my eyes forward. Out of my peripheral vision, I could see Trent and my mother sitting at the plaintiff table. Trent was wearing his standard charcoal power suit, looking incredibly smug and self-assured. My mother, Beatrice, was clutching a lace handkerchief, already playing the role of the devastated matriarch. The bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Sterling, a stern-looking woman with decades of experience on the bench, took her seat. She adjusted her glasses, looked down at the massive stack of fabricated medical and financial documents Trent's lawyers had submitted, and let out a heavy sigh. She looked at me for a long moment. I met her gaze with absolute, unblinking calm. Given the towering pile of lies sitting on her desk, I knew exactly what she saw. She saw a detached, highly medicated, unfeeling woman who was entirely disconnected from reality. The proceedings began, and the plaintiff's attorney immediately called Jasmine to the witness stand. My sister stood up, smoothing down the modest, soft pastel dress she had chosen specifically for this performance. She wanted to look soft, maternal, and deeply burdened by the tragedy of her sibling. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took her seat in the witness box. From the very first question, Jasmine delivered a masterclass in theatrical manipulation. When her lawyer asked her to describe our relationship, her voice trembled beautifully. She spoke softly, clutching her hands tightly in her lap, as if she were holding back a flood of agony. "Your Honor, it absolutely breaks my heart to sit here today." Jasmine began, a single perfectly timed tear rolling down her cheek. "Maya is my little sister. I love her more than anything in this world, but she is very sick. She has been severely ill for over 5 years." Jasmine launched into a sprawling, tragic narrative about my supposed mental collapse. She detailed how my first business had failed, weaving a story where I had simply snapped under the pressure and completely lost my grip on reality. She painted a vivid, horrifying picture of my current living conditions, referencing the dingy decoy apartment I rented on the wrong side of town. "She lives in squalor, Your Honor." Jasmine sobbed, her shoulders shaking. She isolates herself in that tiny dark room for weeks at a time. She refuses to speak to us, refuses to eat properly, and has completely abandoned any semblance of a normal life. We have tried everything. My mother cries herself to sleep every single night, terrified that we are going to get a call from the police saying Maya has hurt herself. We have been secretly paying her rent and dropping off groceries just to keep her from ending up on the streets. The courtroom was completely silent, captivated by her heartbreaking performance. I could hear Aunt Sarah openly weeping in the gallery behind me. Even Judge Sterling leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, her stern expression softening into deep maternal pity. Jasmine then pivoted to the core issue, the $5.2 million property. She looked at the judge with wide, desperate eyes. Before my father passed away, he left Maya a small, barren plot of dirt in the suburbs. Jasmine explained, her voice thick with fake sorrow. It was just a sentimental gesture. Neither of them knew it would ever be worth anything. But recently, the city rezoned the area for commercial tech development. The county just appraised that dirt at over $5 million. Jasmine let out a ragged breath, wiping her eyes with a tissue the bailiff handed her. Your Honor. My sister does not even know how to balance a checkbook. She does not know what a property tax form looks like. If she is left in control of a $5 million commercial asset, she will be instantly targeted by predators and scammers. The state will seize it for unpaid taxes because she cannot even remember what day of the week it is. We are not here to take her money. We are here to protect her from completely destroying her own future. My husband Trent is a senior investment director. He has the expertise to secure this asset in a protected trust so Maya will be safe and cared for the rest of her life. We just want to save her before it is too late. By the time Jasmine finished her testimony, she was openly weeping into her hands. The entire courtroom was drowning in sympathy for her. Trent looked down at his legal pad, hiding a triumphant, wicked smirk. Beatrice patted her chest, looking up at the ceiling, as if thanking God that the truth was finally out. Judge Sterling looked down at me from the bench, her eyes filled with a profound, overwhelming pity. The trap was set perfectly. Jasmine had flawlessly convinced every single person in that room that I was a broken, helpless lunatic who desperately needed my family to strip away my rights for my own protection. Marcus Thorne sat next to me, his massive frame perfectly still. He leaned over slightly, not breaking his gaze from the crying woman on the stand. She is good, Marcus whispered, his voice so low only I could hear it. I will give her that. She is very good. I kept my eyes locked directly on my sister, watching her dab her fake tears. Yes, I murmured back, my voice cold as ice. Let her enjoy the applause. Her stage is about to collapse. Jasmine stepped down from the witness box, accepting a supportive nod from her attorney. She returned to the plaintiff table, delicately wiping her eyes with a tissue and leaning her head against my mother's shoulder. The gallery murmured with sympathetic approval. The plaintiff's lawyer then cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention once again, and called his star witness to the stand. Trent Lawson stood up. He buttoned his charcoal-tailored jacket with a crisp, practiced motion. He did not look like a man entering a family dispute. He looked like a titan of industry stepping into a boardroom to close the most lucrative acquisition of his entire career. He walked to the front of the courtroom with an effortless, arrogant swagger, his expensive leather shoes clicking authoritatively against the polished hardwood floor. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the whole truth, and took his seat in the witness box. From the moment he opened his mouth, Trent deployed his absolute best corporate savior persona. He spoke with a deep, resonant voice, projecting the calm, unshakable confidence of a wealthy, white-collar executive who was simply stepping in to clean up a tragic mess. Your Honor. Trent began making direct, earnest eye contact with Judge Sterling. My name is Trent Lawson. I am the Director of Regional Investments at Sterling Vanguard Bank. I manage billions of dollars in client assets, navigating highly complex domestic and international markets on a daily basis. But today, I am not here as a financial director. I am here as a concerned brother-in-law who wants to protect a vulnerable member of our family. His attorney guided him through a series of rehearsed questions designed to highlight his immense success and unblemished reputation. Trent answered each one flawlessly. He painted himself as a pillar of the financial community, a man trusted by the wealthiest elite to safeguard their futures. He spoke about his fiduciary duties, his strict adherence to market regulations, and his flawless track record of corporate leadership. Then the attorney shifted the focus to me. Trent looked in my direction, and his face shifted into an expression of deep, patronizing pity. Maya is completely ill-equipped to handle an asset of this magnitude, Trent explained, shaking his head with a heavy, theatrical sigh. A $5.2 million commercial property sitting in a highly contested technology corridor is not a lottery ticket, Your Honor. It is a massive financial liability. If left in Maya's hands, the property taxes alone will bankrupt her within a year. She will be hunted down by predatory corporate developers tied up in zoning litigation and subjected to massive capital gains penalties that she cannot even begin to comprehend. She does not understand tax shelters. She does not understand asset protection. If we do not intervene, this sudden windfall will absolutely destroy her. It was a brilliant, terrifyingly persuasive argument. He used his corporate vocabulary to weaponize my supposed ignorance, framing his blatant theft as an act of absolute financial necessity. He was trying to convince the judge that stealing my land was the only way to save my life. I am proposing a structured, highly secure intervention, Trent continued, leaning forward to address the judge directly. If the court grants me financial conservatorship over Maya's estate, I will immediately absorb the deed into a secure blind trust managed by my firm. We will negotiate the sale of the land to the tech developers at maximum market value. The resulting capital will be placed into a tightly regulated, low-risk portfolio. Maya will never have to worry about a single bill, tax form, or predatory developer. We will issue her a generous monthly stipend to ensure her medical treatments and living expenses are fully covered for the rest of her natural life. I am willing to take on this massive administrative burden entirely free of charge out of sheer love for my wife's family. The gallery practically swooned. Trent had just offered to work for free to save his mentally ill sister-in-law from financial ruin. He sounded like an absolute saint. But I knew the truth. I knew that the second that deed transferred to his firm, the land would be liquidated overnight. The $5 million would immediately be funneled into his shadow accounts to pay off his catastrophic margin call before the federal auditors raided his bank. There would be no blind trust. There would be no monthly stipend for me. I would be locked in a psychiatric facility, and he would walk away a free man. Your Honor, the plaintiff's attorney announced, stepping forward with a massive, glossy binder. To prove my client's absolute capability to manage this estate, we are submitting Exhibit C. This is a comprehensive certified disclosure of Mr. Lawson's personal and professional financial records. It includes his flawless credit history, his personal net worth declarations, and his spotless compliance record with the Securities and Exchange Commission. This was the moment. This was the exact second the trap snapped shut. The bailiff took the heavy binder from the attorney and carried it up to the bench. Trent sat back in the witness box, crossing one leg over the other, exuding pure, untouchable arrogance. He watched with a smug, satisfied smirk as the binder was placed directly into the judge's hands. He had done it. He had officially, voluntarily submitted forged financial documents to a sitting judge in a court of law. He had just committed federal perjury, and he was completely oblivious to the radioactive bomb he had just placed on the record. Judge Sterling put on her reading glasses and opened the binder. The courtroom held its collective breath as she flipped through the pages. She studied the fabricated bank statements, the inflated asset declarations, and the completely fake audit reports Trent had paid a fortune to manufacture. After a long, agonizing minute of silence, Judge Sterling looked up from the documents. The deep lines on her forehead softened. She looked at Trent, and then slowly, approvingly, she nodded her head. "The documents appear to be in perfect order, Mr. Lawson," Judge Sterling stated, her voice echoing through the quiet room. "Your financial standing is indeed exceptionally robust." At the plaintiff table, the tension completely evaporated. Jasmine let out a sharp, audible gasp of relief and covered her mouth, her eyes shining with triumphant joy. Beatrice sat up perfectly straight, a wide, victorious smile spreading across her face as she looked over at me with pure, undisguised malice. They had won. The judge had accepted Trent's fake documents as gospel truth. The $5 million property was effectively theirs, and my life was officially over. They were practically vibrating with the thrill of their absolute victory. Trent stepped down from the stand, basking in the warm glow of the judge's approval. He adjusted his tailored tie and returned to the plaintiff's table, sharing a victorious, triumphant look with my sister. They had successfully passed the first massive hurdle. The judge had accepted his fabricated financial superiority as absolute fact. But their performance was not quite over. Their lawyer needed to drive the final, emotional nail into my coffin to ensure the conservatorship was granted without any hesitation. He called my mother Beatrice to the stand. Beatrice stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her modest, perfectly pressed church dress. She walked to the front of the courtroom, projecting the weary, fragile demeanor of a mother who had carried a heavy cross for far too long. The bailiff stepped forward and held out a heavy black Bible. Beatrice placed her hand flat against the holy book, raised her right hand, and swore before God and the court to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched her do it without a single flinch. For a woman who spent every Sunday in the front pew singing hymns, dropping money in the collection plate, and preaching about righteousness to her community, committing absolute premeditated perjury, was remarkably effortless for her. She swore an oath to God to destroy her own daughter, and her hand did not tremble even slightly. She took her seat in the witness box, and the plaintiff's lawyer began his gentle guiding questions. Beatrice played her part flawlessly. She painted a horrifying, vivid picture of my life, claiming I had been suffering from severe, untreated mental illness for nearly a decade. She described entirely fabricated incidents of me screaming at invisible people in the middle of the night, hoarding garbage in my room, and wandering the streets of our neighborhood in manic, dangerous states. She told the judge that she had tried everything humanly possible to get me psychiatric help, claiming she had drained her own modest savings just to keep a roof over my head and keep me out of an institution. "Your Honor!" Beatrice cried out, her voice cracking perfectly as she pulled a delicate lace handkerchief from her purse to dab her eyes. "Maya is my flesh and blood. I carried her. I love her with every single fiber of my being. But she is lost to us in the dark. Her mind is completely broken. She does not understand the value of $1, let alone 5 million of them. If you let her walk out of this courthouse today with legal control of that massive property, she will be dead within a year. She will give it away to predators, or she will be targeted by scammers who will take advantage of her sickness." The gallery was completely spellbound. I could hear the soft sounds of Aunt Sarah and the other church members weeping in the wooden pews behind me. They were entirely deceived by this masterclass in maternal manipulation. Beatrice then turned her tear-filled eyes toward Trent, gesturing to him like he was the second coming of Christ. "Trent has been an absolute angel to this family." Beatrice pleaded, her voice thick with fake desperation. "He is a brilliant, respected financial director. He and Jasmine have offered to take on this massive burden to lock that property in a safe trust, so Maya will never end up freezing on the streets. They are doing this out of the pure goodness of their hearts, sacrificing their own time to manage her estate. Please, Your Honor, I am begging you as a mother, give them the legal authority to save my little girl before she destroys herself." She had weaponized her maternal authority to legitimize their theft. She had effectively told the judge that stealing my $5 million property was an act of profound, selfless family love. By branding me as a helpless lunatic, she positioned Trent and Jasmine as noble martyrs. I sat perfectly still at the defense table. I did not shake my head in denial. I did not jump up to interrupt her lies. I did not show a single ounce of fear, anger, or sadness. My posture was impeccably straight in my midnight blue Italian silk suit. My hands rested calmly, lightly clasped on top of the heavy mahogany table. I simply stared directly at the woman who gave birth to me. My eyes were as sharp and cold as a razor blade. Beatrice briefly met my gaze from the witness stand as she wiped away her fake tears. For a fraction of a second, her performance faltered. She looked into my eyes, expecting to see the terrified, broken girl she had bullied for 32 years. Instead, she saw nothing but a chilling, absolute void looking back at her. She saw a predator patiently watching its prey walk deeper into a trap. She thought she was delivering the final fatal blow to seal my destruction. She had absolutely no idea that she had just sworn on a Bible and committed federal perjury on public record, legally chaining herself to the exact same sinking ship as Trent. I sat there in absolute silence, my expression completely unreadable, watching the people who called themselves my blood relatives gleefully and meticulously dig their own graves. Beatrice stepped down from the witness box, dabbing her eyes one last time for maximum theatrical effect. She returned to the plaintiff table, patting Jasmine's hand and giving Trent a reassuring maternal nod. The plaintiff's attorney stood up, buttoned his suit jacket with a satisfied flourish, and formally rested his case. He looked incredibly proud of himself, fully believing he had just secured a slam-dunk victory for a noble family, trying to save their tragically broken relative. Judge Sterling let out a heavy, solemn sigh. She organized the thick stack of fabricated medical records and fake financial statements on her desk. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with quiet sympathy. The judge looked down at me, her expression projecting the gentle, reluctant sorrow of a magistrate preparing to strip a woman of her autonomy for her own good. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Sterling said, her voice soft but authoritative as she addressed my attorney. "The court is prepared to hear your rebuttal. Do you wish to call a psychiatric expert to the stand to contest the plaintiff's medical claims?" Marcus Thorne did not scramble. He did not look nervous. He stood up slowly, his massive frame commanding immediate, absolute respect in the quiet room. He buttoned his suit jacket, his expression completely devoid of the usual defensive panic seen in conservatorship hearings. "No, Your Honor," Marcus stated, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the heavy air like a perfectly sharpened blade. "The defense calls absolutely no witnesses. We will not be providing any medical experts to debate my client's mental health today." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Jasmine and Beatrice exchanged a quick, thrilled look. They thought we were surrendering. They thought Marcus had looked at their mountain of lies and decided I was completely indefensible. Trent leaned back in his chair, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face as he crossed his arms. He thought he had just won the $5 million prize by default. The plaintiff's attorney stood up, barely containing his glee. "Your Honor, if the defense refuses to provide medical testimony to rebut these severe psychological claims, I ask that you grant the conservatorship petition immediately." Judge Sterling frowned, looking at Marcus with deep confusion. "Mr. Thorne," she warned strictly, "if you do not offer a medical defense, I will have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiffs based on the sworn testimony and medical affidavits provided today. Are you absolutely certain you have nothing to present?" Marcus walked out from behind our defense table and stepped directly into the center of the courtroom floor. "I did not say we have nothing to present, Your Honor." Marcus clarified, his voice dropping into the lethal, calculated cadence of a veteran federal prosecutor closing a trap. "I said medical testimony is completely unnecessary. We do not need a doctor to evaluate my client's sanity because the entire foundation of this petition is a calculated, premeditated act of federal fraud." The courtroom went dead silent. The smug grin on Trent's face instantly vanished. The plaintiff's attorney jumped to his feet, shouting an objection, but Judge Sterling held up her hand, silencing him immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned forward over the bench. "Fraud is a very serious accusation in my courtroom, Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice turning dangerously sharp. "You better have the documentation to back that up." Marcus did not blink. He walked calmly back to our table, picked up a sleek black leather folder and carried it directly up to the judge's bench. "I have exactly 2 exhibits for the court to review," Marcus announced loudly, ensuring every single person in the gallery heard him. "The first document is the certified 5-year corporate tax returns and ownership declarations for my client Maya. The second document is a classified, expedited investigative dossier." Marcus placed the folder directly onto the polished wood of the judge's bench. He flipped it open. Sitting right on top of the stack of pristine white paper was a glaring, undeniable red seal. "It is a direct communication from the United States Securities and Exchange Commission," Marcus declared, turning his head just enough to lock eyes with Trent. "And it explicitly details the actual current financial status of the plaintiff, Trent Lawson, and the Sterling Vanguard Investment Bank." The color completely drained from Trent's face. In a matter of 2 seconds, he went from a cocky, untouchable executive to a man staring directly down the barrel of a loaded gun. The mention of the Securities and Exchange Commission hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He gripped the edge of his table so hard, his knuckles turned white. He started to sweat, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom, as if calculating how fast he could run. Jasmine looked at her husband, completely bewildered by his sudden visceral panic. Beatrice just sat there, her fake tears drying up as genuine confusion took over. They had absolutely no idea what was happening. They did not understand what the federal government had to do with a simple family property dispute. Judge Sterling picked up the documents. She did not look at the medical files anymore. She opened the certified corporate tax returns I had provided. I watched her eyes track back and forth across the page. I watched as her mind processed the bold, undeniable numbers printed under my name. Tens of millions of dollars in annual corporate revenue. Zero debt. A flawless elite financial standing that dwarfed the combined net worth of everyone sitting at the plaintiff table. Then she turned the page to the red-stamped SEC dossier. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the rustling of paper as the judge read the executive summary detailing Trent's massive offshore money laundering operation, his $4.5 million margin debt, and his imminent federal audit. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted with a sudden violent intensity. The air grew icy and thin. The gentle maternal pity that had previously softened Judge Sterling's face was completely eradicated. The transformation was terrifying. A dark, thunderous fury settled over her features. She realized in real time that her courtroom, her authority, and her empathy had just been weaponized by a desperate criminal and a greedy family trying to steal from a highly successful, perfectly sane woman. Judge Sterling slowly lowered the documents to her desk. She did not say a word. She slowly raised her head and leveled a glare so intensely furious at Trent, Jasmine, and Beatrice that the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The execution block was officially built and the judge was holding the axe. Judge Sterling brought her hand down, slamming the heavy leather folder completely shut. The sharp, explosive crack echoed like a gunshot through the dead silence of the courtroom. The sudden sound made Jasmine jump violently in her seat. Beatrice gripped the edge of the plaintiff table, her confident, pious posture instantly faltering as she stared up at the bench in sudden creeping dread. The judge did not look at Trent yet. She turned her absolute furious glare directly onto my mother and my sister. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the elevated desk, her voice dropping into a register of pure, concentrated judicial authority. You sat in my courtroom, placed your hands on a Bible, and swore under oath that this woman is a destitute, mentally incapacitated hazard to herself. Judge Sterling stated each word cutting through the air like jagged glass. You painted a picture of an unemployed, delusional dropout who cannot even manage a basic checking account or feed herself without your daily charity. The judge paused, letting the suffocating weight of her words press down on their shoulders. Then she delivered the strike that would permanently destroy their false reality. You claim your sister is unemployed and mentally ill, Judge Sterling asked, her eyes narrowing into a lethal glare. Do you actually know who your sister really is? Jasmine opened her mouth, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She looked frantically at her attorney, who was scrambling through his own useless notes, completely blindsided by the sudden violent shift in the judge's demeanor. Beatrice clutched her chest, her fake lace handkerchief dropping unceremoniously to the floor. Since you seem entirely ignorant of your own blood relative's existence, allow me to read these certified, federally authenticated documents into the public record, Judge Sterling announced. The judge picked up the top sheet of my corporate filings and held it up. The woman sitting at the defense table, the one you just tried to legally enslave and lock inside a psychiatric ward, is the sole founder and chief executive officer of Obsidian Cybernetics. Her firm holds elite top-tier security clearances and manages critical government and corporate defense contracts across the globe. Her company generates over $30 million in annual revenue. Her personal net worth vastly exceeds the entire value of the $5 million commercial property you are currently trying to seize from her. A massive collective gasp erupted from the gallery. Aunt Sarah, who had been crying tears of pity just 10 minutes ago, let out a loud, shocked shriek. The entire church congregation, sitting in the wooden pews, began whispering frantically. Jasmine's elite real estate colleagues stared at me in absolute undisguised awe. Jasmine's face drained of all color. She looked like all the blood had been violently siphoned from her veins. She grabbed the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles turning stark white, her legs visibly shaking as she struggled to remain standing. Her brain was rapidly short-circuiting. The sister she had relentlessly mocked, the sibling she had called a poor, crazy loser to all her luxury real estate friends to elevate her own status, was a multi-millionaire tech CEO. I was not just richer than her. I possessed a level of generational wealth and corporate power that her tiny, superficial mind could not even begin to comprehend. Beatrice let out a high, thin wheeze. She stared at me across the room, her eyes wide with absolute terror. Her entire identity was built on being the successful, flawless matriarch who unfortunately had to hide her defective, broken daughter in the shadows. In exactly 60 seconds, the judge had completely stripped away her narrative. The church elders sitting behind her were now looking at Beatrice not with sympathy, but with profound, horrified disgust. But Judge Sterling was not finished. She pulled out a secondary stack of papers from the defense folder, her expression growing even more severe. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice rising effortlessly to drown out the chaotic whispering in the gallery. The defense has provided comprehensive, unredacted psychological evaluations from 3 of the most highly respected, board-certified forensic psychiatrists in this nation. These evaluations were conducted entirely independent of one another. All 3 medical experts conclude with absolute scientific certainty that Maya possesses flawless mental acuity, exceptional cognitive function, and 0 signs of any psychiatric disorders whatsoever. The judge picked up the fake medical binder Trent and Jasmine had submitted just an hour prior and held it up for the entire courtroom to see like a piece of toxic waste. This means the medical records the plaintiffs submitted to this court today are a complete premeditated fabrication, Judge Sterling declared, her voice ringing with righteous fury. You attempted to use the legal system to kidnap a perfectly sane, highly successful corporate executive so you could liquidate a $5 million commercial asset for your own personal gain. Jasmine's knees completely gave out. She collapsed back into her wooden chair, unable to support her own weight. She buried her face in her trembling hands, realizing that her perfectly crafted public image was currently being incinerated in front of her friends, her colleagues, and her entire community. Her luxury lifestyle, her country club status, and her false superiority were gone forever. She was about to be publicly branded as a fraud and an abuser. Beatrice sat entirely frozen, her jaw hanging open in a silent scream. She looked over at me, a desperate, pathetic plea forming in her tear-filled eyes. She wanted me to stop this. She wanted me to stand up and save her from the overwhelming, suffocating humiliation she had brought upon herself. She wanted the obedient, terrified daughter to step in and protect her mother's reputation. I did not blink. I sat perfectly still in my custom-tailored midnight blue suit, projecting the absolute untouchable authority of a woman who had fought her way out of hell. I looked directly into my mother's terrified, pleading eyes, and let a slow, cold smile form on my lips. The trap had sprung flawlessly, and I was going to sit there and make sure they felt every single second of the agony they had tried to inflict on me. The courtroom was already reeling from the utter destruction of my mother and sister, but Marcus Thorne was not a man who left a job half-finished. He turned his attention away from the sobbing women and locked his sights entirely on the man who had orchestrated this entire legal ambush. Trent was sitting rigidly at the plaintiff table. His arrogant posture had stiffened into frozen panic, but he was still desperately trying to maintain his mask of elite corporate professionalism. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes darting toward the exit, hoping the judge would simply dismiss the case and let him walk away with a reprimand. He was about to find out that walking away was no longer an option. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice booming with the weight of absolute authority. "The defense has established that the medical foundation of this petition is a complete fabrication. Now we must address the financial foundation." The plaintiff, Trent Lawson, submitted a sworn declaration of his personal assets to this court. He claimed to possess a flawless financial background, positioning himself as the wealthy savior stepping in to manage my client's estate. Marcus picked up the red-stamped dossier from the judge's bench and held it up for the entire room to see. That financial declaration is a work of pure fiction, Marcus declared. The document currently in your hands is a certified classified audit report from the Securities and Exchange Commission conducted by an independent cybersecurity firm. It details the actual unredacted financial reality of Trent Lawson. Trent shot out of his chair as if he had been physically struck. "Objection!" he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, uncontrollable terror. His slick corporate baritone completely vanished, replaced by the frantic pitch of a cornered animal. "Your Honor, this is a family court matter. Those are private corporate documents. They have no bearing on this conservatorship hearing. My attorney needs to object." The plaintiff's attorney, however, was already packing his briefcase. He took one look at the federal SEC seal on the documents, realized his client had just used him to commit a massive crime, and physically stepped away from Trent. "Sit down, Mr. Lawson," Judge Sterling commanded, slamming her gavel down with terrifying force. "You do not object in my courtroom, especially when you are sitting on a mountain of perjury." Trent collapsed back into his seat. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He began to sweat profusely, beads of moisture rolling down his forehead and staining the collar of his expensive tailored shirt. Marcus did not give him a single second to breathe. "The federal audit proves that Trent Lawson is currently holding a margin call debt of exactly $4.5 million, Marcus stated, reading directly from the certified file. "It proves that he has been systematically embezzling funds from the retirement accounts of vulnerable clients at Sterling Vanguard Bank. Furthermore, he has been laundering those stolen funds through a complex network of offshore shell companies, all maliciously registered under his wife's maiden name to shield himself from federal liability." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Jasmine whipped her head around to stare at her husband, her tear-stained face twisted from public humiliation into absolute horror. He had used her name to commit federal wire fraud. He had secretly tied her identity to an international money laundering syndicate. "Trent, what did you do?" Jasmine shrieked, grabbing his arm. "Tell them it is a lie. Tell them you did not use my name." Trent violently yanked his arm away from her. "Shut up, Jasmine," he hissed, his elite, cultured facade shattering into a million pieces. "Just shut up and let me think." "There is no thinking your way out of this," Marcus continued relentlessly. "Mr. Lawson discovered that my client possessed a commercial property valued at $5.2 million. Desperate to cover his massive financial crimes before the federal auditors raided his bank, he orchestrated this entire conservatorship. He wanted to strip my client of her human rights, lock her in a psychiatric ward, and liquidate her property to pay off his margin debt. And to achieve this, he willingly submitted forged financial documents to this court." Marcus turned to face the judge, his posture perfectly rigid. Submitting fake financial records to a sitting judge to fraudulently seize assets is perjury and grand larceny. "He did not just attempt to rob my client, Your Honor. He actively committed a federal crime right here on the public record." The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Every single person in the room was staring at Trent. The wealthy, arrogant, white-collar executive who had walked into the room acting like a god among men was completely exposed as a desperate, pathetic thief. His chest heaved as he hyperventilated. He stammered, looking wildly around the room for any escape route, but there was none. "This is a setup," Trent babbled, his hands shaking violently as he pointed a trembling finger at me. "She set me up. She hacked my firm. She framed me." Judge Sterling looked at him with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "You submitted the fraudulent documents to this court yourself, Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You stood under oath and lied to my face. You attempted to weaponize the legal system to kidnap a brilliant, successful woman so you could cover up your own pathetic financial crimes. You are an absolute disgrace." The judge picked up her gavel. She did not look at the plaintiff table anymore. She looked directly at Marcus and me. "This petition for conservatorship is denied in its entirety," Judge Sterling announced, her voice echoing with absolute finality. The medical claims are dismissed with prejudice as fraudulent. The financial claims are dismissed as malicious. Maya retains full unrestricted control of all her personal and commercial assets. This court finds absolutely no merit in a single word the plaintiffs have spoken today. The gavel slammed down. The sound marked the official permanent end of their legal siege. The $5 million property was legally and forever mine. Trent's desperate bid for survival had completely failed, and the full weight of his actions was about to crush him into dust. The echo of the gavel had barely faded from the air when the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung violently open. Nobody moved to leave. Everyone in the gallery was completely frozen, captivated by the absolute destruction that had just occurred. But the performance was not quite over. 3 men and 1 woman walked down the center aisle in a tight tactical formation. They were not wearing expensive tailored suits or designer dresses. They wore dark utilitarian windbreakers with 3 bold yellow letters printed across their backs. FBI. Marcus leaned over to me and gave a curt, satisfied nod. Judge Sterling had clearly coordinated with the Securities and Exchange Commission the moment she reviewed our classified dossier in her chambers before the hearing. The federal authorities had been waiting right outside the courtroom doors the entire time, just letting Trent finish committing perjury on the public record before they made their move. Trent Lawson, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying a harsh, unmistakable finality as he approached the plaintiff table. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and perjury. Stand up and place your hands behind your back." Trent did not stand up. His legs simply refused to support him. He looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He sat there, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The 2 agents did not wait for him to find his courage. They stepped forward, grabbed him by the arms of his expensive charcoal suit, and hauled him to his feet. The cold, heavy clink of metal handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed through the silent room. That metallic sound was the exact trigger that shattered Jasmine's reality. No, Jasmine shrieked, a raw, guttural sound tearing from her throat. Her carefully cultivated high society persona instantly vanished. She lunged forward, grabbing desperately at the FBI agent's arm. "You cannot take him. We have a gala this weekend. He is a director. You are making a mistake. Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be detained for interfering with a federal arrest," the agent warned, easily stepping out of her grasp. "We will be seizing all financial assets, vehicles, and properties connected to the offshore shell companies registered under your name. You can expect a visit from federal auditors regarding your real estate licenses by tomorrow morning." The words hit Jasmine with the force of a runaway freight train, seizing all assets. In a matter of seconds, the horrifying math computed in her superficial mind. The designer wardrobe, the luxury SUV, the sprawling suburban mansion, the country club memberships, everything she had built her entire identity around was gone. It was all bought with dirty money, and the federal government was about to strip her down to absolute zero. Jasmine collapsed onto the courtroom floor. The soft pastel dress she had worn to play the innocent, concerned sister pooled around her as she began to wail uncontrollably. It was not the pretty theatrical crying she had performed on the witness stand just an hour earlier. It was a manic, humiliating, ugly display of pure devastation. She was losing her entire world, and her elite real estate colleagues sitting in the gallery were watching her writhe on the dirty floor in absolute disgrace. Beatrice watched her golden son-in-law being frog-marched down the aisle in handcuffs. She watched her perfect, flawless daughter sobbing hysterically on the ground. The pristine family image she had ruthlessly protected for decades had just been incinerated in front of her entire church congregation. The elders from her church were already standing up and walking out in disgusted silence, shaking their heads at the sinful, greedy woman who had lied on the Holy Bible. Panic, raw and absolute, seized my mother. She looked wildly around the room as her entire universe collapsed. Then her eyes found me. I was still standing calmly at the defense table, Marcus by my side. I was untouched, pristine, and backed by a $30 million corporate empire. In her sheer blind desperation, Beatrice forgot every vile thing she had just done. She forgot that she had just tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward. She only saw a lifeline. Beatrice scrambled away from the plaintiff table, stumbling over her own feet as she rushed across the courtroom toward me. Maya. Beatrice cried out, her face twisted in terrified agony. She reached out with trembling hands and grabbed my forearm, gripping the sleeve of my silk suit like a drowning woman clinging to a raft. Maya, my baby, please. You have to help us. You have the money, you have the lawyers, please save our family. I looked down at the hands gripping my arm. I did not pull away immediately. I let her hold on for just a second, letting her feel the desperate hope that I might revert to the obedient, terrified daughter who always fixed their messes. I looked into her panicked eyes, seeing the exact same woman who had told me I was a stain on her legacy just the night before. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my arm out of her grasp. I stepped back, severing the physical contact, and looked at her with an expression of absolute freezing indifference. I am sorry, Beatrice, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet space left behind by Trent's exit. But you just swore before God in this court that I am completely insane. Beatrice froze, the breath catching in her throat, as the realization of her own perjury was thrown right back in her face. I tilted my head slightly, delivering the final fatal blow to our relationship. How can a crazy person save anyone? My mother let out a small, broken gasp. Her knees buckled, and she slumped against the wooden railing of the defense table, completely defeated. She had dug the grave with her own hands, and I had just pushed her in. I did not offer her a hand up. I simply turned away. I walked out of the heavy oak doors of the county courthouse and stepped directly into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. Marcus Thorne walked beside me, his briefcase securely in hand. We did not look back. We did not need to. The sounds of my sister wailing and the sharp commands of the federal agents echoing from the courtroom behind us were the only closure I would ever need. The legal war was officially over, and the fallout was absolute. In the months that followed, the justice system dismantled my family with a ruthless mechanical efficiency. Trent never stood a chance against the federal government. The classified dossier my company compiled handed the Securities and Exchange Commission a flawless roadmap of his entire criminal empire. The trial was incredibly brief. Faced with undeniable digital evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, Trent took a plea deal. The arrogant, untouchable financial director traded his $3,000 tailored suits for a standard-issue federal prison uniform. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in a high-security penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. His banking career was permanently eradicated. Jasmine suffered a collapse so spectacular it became a cautionary tale in the local high society circuits. Because Trent had arrogantly registered all of his illegal offshore shell companies under her maiden name, the federal authorities seized absolutely everything she owned. The government confiscated her luxury SUV, her designer wardrobe, her expensive jewelry, and the sprawling suburban mansion she loved to flaunt. Stripped of her stolen wealth, Jasmine was forced to stand in front of a bankruptcy judge and file for Chapter 7. But the financial ruin was only half of her punishment. Her elite real estate colleagues, the same people she had invited to the courthouse to watch my humiliation, completely blacklisted her. Nobody in the luxury market wanted a broker whose entire portfolio was built on stolen client funds. Penniless, disgraced, and utterly humiliated, Jasmine was forced to pack her few remaining cheap bags and move back into her childhood bedroom at our mother's house. As for Beatrice, her beloved social kingdom crumbled entirely. The court transcripts from the conservatorship hearing became public record. It did not take long for the audio recording of our phone call to circulate through the community. The entire congregation of her church, the same people she had manipulated into praying for my supposed insanity, heard the raw, unedited audio of Beatrice threatening to lock her own daughter inside a psychiatric ward just to steal her inheritance. The backlash was severe and immediate. Aunt Sarah and the church elders completely ostracized her. When Beatrice tried to attend Sunday service, people would stand up and move to different pews rather than sit next to her. The isolation broke her. Stripped of her matriarchal authority and her social validation, she stopped leaving the house altogether. She was left to spend the rest of her days trapped in a quiet, miserable home with the very daughter she had raised to be just as toxic and greedy as she was. They were finally forced to live with each other entirely alone. My life took a vastly different trajectory. I took full, undisputed possession of the land my father had secretly left me. I did not sell it to the highest bidding developer. Instead, I used the massive capital generated by my cybersecurity firm to develop the property myself. I transformed that barren plot of dirt into a sprawling state-of-the-art technology campus. My business expanded exponentially, securing more federal contracts and cementing my position as one of the most powerful executives in the industry. I had taken the worst moments of my life and forged them into an unbreakable empire. The camera smoothly glides away from the memory of the courthouse, moving slowly through the warm, low-key lighting of my luxurious penthouse living room. The lens drifts backward in a steady, calculated motion, capturing the deep shadows and the absolute tranquility of my private sanctuary. I am sitting perfectly still on the rich leather sofa, wearing a crisp, elegant suit, holding a warm cup of tea. The chaotic noise of my past is a million miles away. I set the teacup down on the glass table. I stand up slowly, moving with the quiet confidence of a woman who completely owns her reality. I walk across the polished hardwood floor, stepping toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the sprawling, vibrant city skyline below. The neon lights reflect softly against the glass. That $5.2 million piece of land, I say, my voice steady, carrying a tone of absolute, unshakable victory. I built the largest data center in the state on it. Sometimes the only way to defeat toxic people is to let them choke on their own greed. The city lights continue to glow brightly against the dark glass as the screen slowly fades to absolute black.